is Robert Picardo, the holographic doctor from Star Trek Voyager, and Commander Woolsey from Stargate Atlantis. You're listening to Mike the Birdman and the rest of the Twig crew on ThisWeekInGeek.net.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Hey guys, what's going on? You are listening to ThisWeekInGeek.net, and welcome to Future Imperfect, the show that we dedicate to Star Trek, Star Wars, Stargate, or anything involving science fiction in general. Could be books, could be toys, could be anything. And I am your away mission leader today. As you may notice, I am alone in the room so far. And I am, of course, Mike the Birdman. And, well, it's kind of nice to try something a little bit different here. One of the things I really love doing here on Twig is I love interviewing people, and I love talking about some of their cool projects they got going on. And one of the coolest things I got handed recently, I got contacted by Hero Collector and Eagle Moss, and there's a book that's just come out recently. It's called Star Trek: A Celebration. Now, obviously, Star Trek is a franchise that has been around for decades at this point. We have the original series that started in the 60s, and most recently we have Lower Decks, Picard, Discovery, Strange New Worlds. There's a new movie in the works. It's a good time to be a Star Trek fan, and if you're a guy like me who likes the Star Trek role-playing game from Modifius, then, you know, there's a lot to get excited about right now. So, a couple weeks ago, I got an email out of the blue from a man named Ian Spelling. And this guy, and I'm actually just going to read you the blurb from the Star Trek: A Celebration book, because this does far more justice to this guy than I possibly ever could. So it reads as follows. Ian Spelling is a veteran entertainment journalist whose Star Trek association dates back to the mid-1980s when he interviewed Gene Roddenberry for his college newspaper. Ian went to write for Starlog for more than 20 years and contributed regularly to Star Trek Monthly, Star Trek Magazine, the official Star Trek movie magazine, the official Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager magazines. Additionally, he wrote the weekly syndicated column Inside Trek Strange Worlds for 22 years and served as editor of StarTrek.com, the official Star Trek site from 2010 to 2019. Ian also beamed onto Star Trek twice as an extra, playing a Bajoran in the Deep Space Nine episode Sanctuary and a Drayon soldier in the Voyager episode Innocence. Ian often moderates panels at Star Trek conventions, including Star Trek Las Vegas, Star Trek The Cruise, Destination Star Trek, and WonderCon at Home. So you might be wondering, why am I talking about Ian? Maybe I'm reviewing the book. Maybe I'm not, but I am. So I want to welcome, without any further ado, let's beam him up from the planet's surface. Welcome Ian Spelling to the show.
Hey, Mike, how are you? Thank you for having me.
I am very excited to talk to you. I've been a fan of Star Trek for a number of years. I grew up watching Star Trek The Next Generation. I had a Star Trek fan club when I was in elementary school. Me and 3 other kids. It still counts. And I've been playing the Star Trek role-playing games over the years. I'm a huge fan of Voyager. And I've never taken a liking to the original series until I started reading through this book. The series just never spoke to me. But while I was reading your book, Ian, I started to appreciate things that I didn't know. Because one of the things that every Trek knows, there were 2 pilots shot for Star Trek, The Cage and then Where No Man Has Gone Before. And I never knew a lot of the casting stories behind that and how certain characters evolved and how we're kind of getting a redone version with Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which I think comes out next summer, I want to say. So let's talk about the book Star Trek: A Celebration. And then I want to talk about your career, like how you got started and involved in literally the final frontier and one of the premier science fiction television shows literally since the inception of television. So how did you get approached to write this fully authorized behind the scenes look? Because Star Trek has had a lot of books written about it, but this is probably one of the best.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It came together in a kind of an oddly organic fashion, and it amazed me. All of my friends for a million years have said, Ian, you should write a book about Star Trek. You should write a book about Star Trek. I've also covered celebrities for 30-something years, dating back to college in the 80s. And everybody said, oh, you should do a compendium of your interviews, all of that. But I was like, who's going to want to read that? I don't know if I can write a book. I whined and complained my way through every excuse of why not to. And all of a sudden, the past year, I was doing PR for Hero Collector. And Hero Collector is the publishing division of Eaglemoss. And Eaglemoss makes all those great Star Trek ship models and tons of other products too, but they're very well known for the ship models, particularly the Star Trek ones. And the Ben Robinson at Hero Collector says to me one day, hey, Ian, the Voyager book is out. It's doing great. Do you want to co-write the next book with me, which would be the original series, which is the second in their celebration series of books about the Star Trek shows? And am I going to say no to that? It's been on my bucket list forever to write a book. I whined about doing it, but deep down I wanted to do it. So next thing I know, I'm writing the book with Ben. And, X amount of months later, here we are. The book is out, and it was #1 this week on Amazon in the art of film and video category, which is very exciting. And I mean, we're ahead of Dune and a Harry Potter book, if I'm not mistaken, which kind of blows my mind when you think about it. But here we are.
So when you were kind of writing this book, you must have had access to some amazing things from CBS, Paramount, and all sorts of other people. So when you were compiling research and doing stuff for this book, what were some of the resources that you were able to consult and then put those resources into actual writing?
Great question, but let me break it down and back it up a second for you.
Okay.
One of the challenges that we decided to deal with this book is, look, there's 55 years of Star Trek. What stories haven't been told? Everybody knows this or this or this or this. And there have been books about, just for argument's sake, the ships or the special effects or the actors or this element or that element, but not one book that was kind of a big, broad tent encompassing everything. So that was the goal, was to basically create a convention in a book. We're going to look at everything on the show. Now, if there's going to be any complaints about the book from people, it's they wish we went deeper on this or deeper on this or deeper on this. But we had 256 pages to play with. So to your question, we wanted to get in as much information as we could that would be of interest to longtime fans, maybe things they didn't know. And then we also had to take into account that maybe a fan is a fan of Star Trek now because of Star Trek Discovery. Well, this book will show them where it all started. So we're trying to appeal to really two audiences here, the longtime hardcore fan and the newcomer. So taking all of that into account, then Ben and I went through every document we could find from archives. We went through every other thing that he and I had written ourselves. I've been writing about Star Trek since I interviewed Gene Roddenberry back in college, and I ended up selling that interview to Starlog, and that started my career rolling as a professional writer. But my first articles were George Takei and Walter Koenig and Gene and Majel for the Albany Student Press for my college newspaper. And even there are some quotes from one or two of those articles in the book. And,
oh, wow.
Again, a lot of the stuff I ended up doing ended up being official because it was for the Star Trek magazine or it was for the Star Trek website. So wherever we could, we got new interviews. So Walter Koenig is a new interview. George Takei is a new interview. A lot of the guest stars are new interviews where we could get them. Where we couldn't get new interviews, where somebody said no, for example, William Shatner very politely declined. Leonard Nimoy could tell you in episode 6, I wore this tunic, and here was why. Shatner can't do that. That's just not the way he's wired. He doesn't remember specifics like that from 55 years ago. And I get that. It's not everybody can. So what I did was, in that particular instance, what Ben and I did was we went back and we found the interviews from the time with Shatner so that the material was as fresh and original as it could be. And by original, I mean, accurate at the time. So that, stories tend to change over the years. I actually saw some interviews with producers or directors where in 1960 something they hated an episode or a movie, and in 2010, a few months before they passed away, the story had changed because it had become so popular. It's that kind of a thing, kind of a little revisionist history that happens. So wherever we could, we found the source information, or we confirmed it with new interviews, or we found call sheets, or we found, and in many cases, for example, Jimmy Doohan is no longer with us. So some of the material, I found a couple of great television interviews that he had done. We also went to his autobiography, to his memoir, which was the way to go. So in some cases, you're going to run into situations. Again, time changes things. Stories change over time, but at least you're getting it from the source. So if there's something in there that is attributed to Jimmy Doohan, it's because Jimmy Doohan said it. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And then in terms of access to the art, that was really interesting. So yes, of course, we had access to all of the CBS art that's existed over the years. But part of the fun thing was private collectors have collections of photos and sketches, particularly sketches of Bill Tice's costumes. And that's where we were able to find a trove of material. I don't know if you know who James Cawley is, but he runs the Star Trek set tour up in Ticonderoga, New York.
Oh, wow.
Which is literally a recreation of the original Star Trek set at Desilu. So you can go up there and enjoy what it was like to be on the set in the late 60s, mid 60s, watching them film the original series. It's an unbelievable destination, and a lot of fans have been going there. And he is an avid collector. So he's got some original costumes. He was friends with Bill Tice. He has sketches and photos and all sorts of stuff that are either never seen before or rarely ever seen. So COVID messed with a lot of this, but what was great was Ben and I did a Zoom call with Patrick, with his son, with James Cawley and James's son, Patrick, where the four of us thumbed through the photos together. And we're like, never seen that. That's a cool photo. Where'd that one come from? Oh, that's an alternate of this famous photo. That kind of a thing. And that's where we were able to get a lot of material as well. And then there was another person who had a lot of art that Ben knew. So he got some from that person as well. And that's how we were able to do it.
Now, when you were going through all this material and revisiting stuff and talking to some of the guest stars, what was the most unexpected piece of material that you found?
I don't want to give it all away, but a couple of my favorite things were, let's see, there was April Tatro, who was the human form of the cat Isis in Assignment Earth. Larry Nemechek is the one who actually found her. She was a mystery. There was another actress, uncredited on screen, by the way, who was thought to have played the role. And a few years ago, she finally came out and said, "It wasn't me, leave me alone." And so Larry tracked down how and who, and it turned out to be this woman, April Tatro, but she had never done a print interview before. She was on Larry's podcast, but our interview with her in the book is the first time she's ever done a print interview about her experience. So that was very cool. Ruben Klamer is the man who created the Game of Life, the board game that we all played when we were younger. And
Okay.
He is also the creator of the gun from The Man from U.N.C.L.E., the prop toy that was sold millions of them over the years, especially back in the 60s when the show was on. Roddenberry hired him to do the phaser rifle for Where No Man Has Gone Before. The phaser rifle suggested action. NBC initially turned down the first pilot, The Cage, because they felt it was too cerebral, right? They wanted more action. So Where No Man Has Gone Before was the action episode with the phaser rifle and Kirk rolling around with it and Gary Lockwood and Sally Kellerman and all of that. So this guy, it was 99 years old when I spoke to him earlier this year. He had been sick. He'd been in the hospital. It took me about 2 weeks to track him down. And I finally did. And his assistant called one day and said, Ian, he's feeling pretty well today. Do you want to speak to him? He can do it. And I said, let's do it right now. And sure enough, I got on the phone with him and got this interview. Mr. Klamer passed away the other day. So wow. I'm so thrilled that we got him in the book and we're able to include his story. You and I might not be talking right now. What you mentioned about this whole renaissance of Star Trek with Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks and Picard and all of it, none of it might have happened were it not for Ruben Klamer's domino in the chain of dominoes falling that made Star Trek a reality. So that was a great one to have too. And there's a bunch like that in there. Andrea Drom was one of the yeomen, and that could have changed her career if she had stayed with the show. Nichelle Nichols was not working one day. And of course, that's the day that Muhammad Ali came to visit the set. It's a story we had never heard.
Oh, wow.
That Muhammad Ali came to visit the set wanting to meet her, which was very cool. So there's all sorts of little anecdotes in there like that.
I think there's something when you hear stories like that it makes Star Trek feel a little bit more accessible, a little bit more human. And that's sort of what attracted me to reading through this book, because I love anecdotes. I love hearing stuff like that. And when you told me the story about the phaser rifle, like, I am a huge prop nerd. Like, I can tell you everything about the M41A pulse rifle from Aliens or RoboCop's Auto 9. I know that like the back of my hand. Star Trek props I'm only really starting to get into now. I have like a Voyager Dolphin phaser somewhere. And just knowing that the trajectory of Star Trek changed because of a rifle. And I always thought the TOS rifle looked a little goofy. Now, whole new respect for it, literally in the last 30 seconds, which is incredible.
And there's more to it. I mean, when you read the chapter, I mean, that rifle ended up being used in a famous photo shoot. And then the rifle was never seen again on the show. And then the rifle seemed to disappear for decades. And then Ruben Klamer sold it for almost $250,000 a few years ago. He had it the entire time. It was sitting in a box in his office, and they kept moving it around. So in case, God forbid, the office ever got robbed, they may not steal the gun. It was just the coolest thing. So,
that's incredible just to hear stories like that. I mean, like I said, Star Trek, like I said, is going through this renaissance right now, bringing in new fans. And for a long time, I was a little worried about Star Trek because me and Discovery have a complicated history. So going back to the original stuff and reading this book, it makes me want to revisit the series, maybe see what everybody else saw in it. Because one of my elementary school teachers was a guy named Mr. Collins, and he showed me the episode, the first time they encounter the Romulans, where he compared it to Das Boot, and I'm like 10 years old at the time. Like, I don't know what that is, but I thought it was really cool. And then the time before I went to my first anime convention, Anime North in 1999, I saw the episode with Trelane. And that's what really got my attention. Is like, okay, Star Trek can be quirky and weird. And then I saw Spock's brain, and that kind of broke me. But it's so cool just to see what other people get out of, and hearing just the passion in your voice and reading you and Ben's words in this book shows me a side of Star Trek that I'd never really seen before. Because I've seen the documentary for Trekkies 1 and 2, hosted by Denise Crosby. I've seen the other one. I can't remember what it's called, but it's the Deep Space Nine one. And it's cool to see what people are passionate about, because Star Trek has always been a very powerful force in a lot of people's lives. Some people use it to motivate them to go into science. Some people use it to get into acting. And one of the people that we work with on our podcast, Aaron Pollyea, writes ships specifically for Star Trek for one of the role-playing game companies that currently has the license. And that game is called Star Trek Adventures. And I've been rediscovering my love of Trek through that. So to kind of transition out of the book, I want to learn more about you, Ian, because you've had a career, like I said, in 1980 something. You interviewed Gene Roddenberry. So how does your career as a writer start with Star Trek, and then you became the editor of StarTrek.com? That's quite a journey. Plus, you're on screen in Star Trek. So what is your history other than interviewing Gene? Like, where does everything start with you?
I'm going to try to give you the shortest answer I can, but you're looking at 30-something years, almost 40 at this point. I grew up on Long Island watching the repeats on Channel 11 of the original series at 6 and 11 o'clock. I was a diehard fan, and then I started to go to creations conventions in New York. And it suddenly hit me when I started to write for my college newspaper that I could maybe do stories about Star Trek for my college paper. So I would call the convention. Back in the old days, the talent would stay at the same hotel, where, or at least the secondary actors. You know, Nimoy and Shatner probably flew in and out, but everybody else stayed at the same hotel where the event was. And so I would call the hotel and say, "Can you please put me through to Mr. Takei's room?" "Sure, hang on." "Hello. Mr. Takei, my name's Ian Spelling. I'm with the Albany Student Press. Would you do an interview with me for my college newspaper?" "Sure, kid. Do you jog?" And I lied, and I said yes. And George said, "Meet me at the hotel at 7 a.m. We'll jog, we'll come back, and we'll do an interview." I said, "Fine." So there's a longer version of that story, but basically that's what happened. And then Walter Koenig met me at a diner near, I think it was Kennedy Airport, where there was a convention out at the hotel right by the airport. Jimmy Doohan did an interview with me. Mark Leonard did an interview with me as well. And then I was at some other convention that Gene and Majel were at. Majel sat down and did a 15-minute interview with me. Roddenberry handed me his business card and said, "Call my assistant and tell her I said yes." And I called. We set up the interview. Somebody died. A director friend of Roddenberry's passed away. Roddenberry tracked me down in my college dorm, spoke to my roommate. There's a yellow sticky on my door. "Gene Roddenberry called, has to postpone the interview. Director friend died. Here's his home office number. Call him and you'll reschedule the interview."
Oh, wow.
I did. Roddenberry then says, "Let me call you so you don't have to pay the phone bill," because this was the 80s and it was like $1 a minute to call California. And sure enough, we did an interview that went almost an hour. And then he says to me, "This was great. Let's do it again." I have to tell you, Mike, one of the biggest mistakes in my career, I didn't record the second conversation with Roddenberry. For $1 million, I couldn't even tell you what we discussed. He just said, I remember him saying, "I want to talk more about art and science and humanity." And I'm like, "Okay, sure thing, Mr. Roddenberry." But I ended up selling that interview to Starlog. It wasn't the first interview I sold to Starlog. I did Tawny Welsh for Cocoon, and I did James Remar for Clan of the Cave Bear. But Roddenberry and Majel were the first Star Trek interviews that I sold to Starlog. And from there, I ended up doing George and Walter and lots of other people for them. And then Dave McDonald, who was the editor of Starlog for my entire run with the magazine from, I guess, 1985 to 2009 when it went out of business. And he's still a dear friend of mine. I wrote for them for, I guess, 24 years. And I became their Star Trek guy. It just kind of happened. It wasn't, I don't know how, but it just kind of did. And then Starlog at the time was publishing the official TNG, then Deep Space Nine, and Voyager magazines, and I ended up writing for them. And then somewhere along the line, Titan emailed me and said, hey, we're doing the British official Star Trek magazine. We'd love you to write for us. And so I started writing for them as well. And next thing I knew, I was writing a weekly column for the New York Times Syndicate called Inside Trek. And that ran in as many as, I think, 40 papers at one point in the 90s. And the column ran, it started in 93. The first one was about René Aubergenois on Deep Space Nine. And what had happened was I was doing entertainment, not Star Trek, but just entertainment in general for the New York Times Syndicate, which is the wire service owned by the New York Times. And one of the pieces was a set visit to Deep Space Nine. And that sold so well that they decided to do a weekly column about Star Trek, and they asked me to do it. And like I said, that ran for 20 years, not all about Star Trek the entire time. It later became Inside Trek and Sci-Fi, particularly during the lull after Enterprise went off the air. We needed to cover other things than just Star Trek, but ended up being great. And then, of course, when the movies came back and all of that, we covered that as well. And that only ended a couple of years ago, that column. So that was a great run. And then all of a sudden in 2010, a publicist mentioned to me that StarTrek.com was looking for an editor. And I got the gig. I think I was one of 10 people who interviewed for it. And they chose me, which I was very happy about. And if you look at the articles, they're all StarTrek.com staff. They don't say Ian Spelling on them. And that was simply because, and I agreed with this, they didn't want it to be a personality thing. They didn't want it to be, StarTrek.com by anybody. It's StarTrek.com as its own thing. And so that worked out beautifully. And then over time, I ended up moderating panels at the big event in Las Vegas, Star Trek Las Vegas, that Creation had for many years. They're still doing their shows, but they're not licensed anymore. They're not the official people doing the show, but they're still doing Star Trek shows. And I literally just did the show in August for them, moderating panels. So it's been a long run, and it's been great. And I've covered Star Trek for other things. I did stories for the Cable Guide, for DirecTV's magazine, for I did a story for Variety about Star Trek many years ago. I did a piece for MSN back in the day as well. So it's been the gift that keeps on giving.
Absolutely. And one of the things I've always noticed about the Star Trek community is you meet a lot of interesting people and you make a lot of friends, sometimes some lifelong friends. So who are some of the people you've met that you would consider friends so far?
Well, there are fans who are good friends of mine. I mean, Dave McDonnell is a great friend of mine who, if it weren't for him, I wouldn't have done any of this. He lives out in Pennsylvania, and he's one of the dedications for the book, because I literally acknowledge that without Dave, none of this would have happened. Let's see, who else? I mean, I'm pretty good friends with George Takei. Walter Koenig and I are very friendly. I was the guy who instant messaged him to tell him he was getting his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and he instant messaged me back saying, "Go away, that's not real. I hear that every day." I said, "Walter, it's real. The announcement is from the LA Chamber of Commerce." He says, "Send it to me." Literally, I cut and pasted and sent it to him, and he's like, pretty much like, "Holy cow, okay, this is real." So it was an absolute pleasure when he got that star. I was able to go out and be there at the ceremony and kind of share the day with him. Obviously, that was all about his family, and I watched from the outside. I'm not pretending that he and I are dear bosom buddies, but it was wonderful. And then near the very end, on the dance floor, after he had a big dance with his wife, I pulled him aside and said, "So how's this been?" And it was a wonderful moment to share with him. There are fans who are friends of mine. I've got, anybody looks on my Facebook page, tons of folks are friends of mine on Facebook, and some I'm very close with, and some are Facebook friends. People who have an interest in your life, in your world, but are in another state or in another country. So you have that kind of online relationship with them as well. And, the guys at Creation, Gary and Adam. It's Adam who convinced me and Gary who convinced me to get up on the stage and do the moderating. I'm not a public speaker. It was never anything I wanted to do. And he's like, would you do this? I think you'd be really good at it. And sure enough, the first one went, I said, start me on the secondary stage, on the smaller stage, like on a Sunday, where there won't be as many people, so I can get over the stage fright and the nerves. And that went well. And then he said, okay, next year I want you on the bigger stage. And that went fine. And then the year after that, my boss at CBS, who was also a friend of mine, Bill Burke, who passed away a few weeks ago, Bill was the one who said, all right, I need you to, this was 2017, and they were introducing the Discovery cast and Discovery props and behind the scenes guys and makeup and all of that. And so several of us had to moderate those panels. I think there were 3 of us that moderated those 4 or 5 panels that weekend. And he's like, I want you to do that. So, again, thank you to Gary and Adam for, prodding me to go ahead and do it. So it's all, just the right person in the right place at the right time. And then, yes, you have to follow through and do a good job at whatever it is you're getting the opportunity to do. But a lot of this is, somebody gives you a break and you got to capitalize on it.
Yeah, and you've absolutely done that over your decades-long career. I mean, obviously, you've done moderation, you've met people, you've interviewed people, you've even been on screen, and you're a part of this franchise now. And I think that's something really, really cool from a kid who just watched the reruns on Long Island on Channel 11 all those years ago. Like, it's a pretty cool story, and just to hear how you've come into this world, the book itself, I think this is really cool, and I really think people should check out Star Trek, A Celebration from Hero Collector and Eagle Moss. So I guess, Ian, before I let you go today, what are some of the other projects that you'll currently be working on?
Well, actually, right now we're just starting the process of the next gen book. So as I think you've probably put 2 and 2 together now, the Star Trek A Celebration books are a series. So the first one was Voyager because it was the 25th anniversary. The second one is the original series for the 55th anniversary. And the next one is going to be Next Gen for the 35th anniversary. And I am working on that one pretty much as we speak. We've just laid out the flat plan for it, as the Brits call it. And I've done a couple of interviews already for it. And we are ready to rock and roll with that. And then I know a Deep Space Nine one is in the works. And as I think I've mentioned, I can't remember if this was before or after we started chatting with your recorder on, but I'm also doing the PR for Hero Collector, which is what actually led to the opportunity to write Celebration. So there's a bunch of books coming up. Several of them are Star Trek books. They've got Beatles, they've got James Bond, they've got all sorts of stuff. So I'm wearing my various hats, and I'm still doing interviews. I'm covering the new Bond film for an outlet, a parenting website that I write for. I write for another site called Below the Line, which is all about directors, actors, directors, producers, writers, editors, sound designers, all of that type of stuff. The people who are literally below the line on shows and movies. And that's kind of cool because for most of my career, I've interviewed actors. So it's kind of cool to, do the conversations with the people who handle the nuts and bolts of the shows and movies that everybody consumes. And a little bit of everything. I kind of consider myself a wandering Jew or a vagabond or a gypsy, whatever you want to call it. Wherever there's an opportunity to, do something interesting and make a living at it at the same time and have a little bit of fun. I've worked from home since 1997 as a freelancer. So I've gotten to go to all of my son's baseball games, all my daughter's volleyball games. I think I've seen more of my kids. I've got 2 than the average dad probably has gotten to see of their kids. My trusty buddy who's sitting behind me, very good, behaving fabulously well is my dog Oreo, who's going to be 17 and literally is sitting in the same bed that he's been in for, I would say, 2/3 of his life. I wouldn't trade it for the world. It's been an unusual and very cool career, and I'm kind of glad it's mine.
Well, Ian, I got to say, from Star Trek fans around the world and places beyond, thank you so much for your contributions. I'm really looking forward to talking with you again. And like I said, folks, if you want to check out this book, it's called Star Trek, A Celebration. That's available from Hero Collector in Eaglemoss. You can find it on most major retailer websites. So if you've got a Star Trek fan in your life, I highly recommend you check this out, especially if you're a fan of the original series. And even if you're not, this may be the push you maybe need to check out Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, but also take a look at some of the other lesser characters like the Romulan sub commander and stuff like that. There's a lot of things in there that they kind of go into and stuff that you maybe didn't know. So that's going to do it for us here at This Week in Geek here on Future Imperfect. Coming up on the show, I know we're going to be doing season wrap-ups of Star Trek Season 2 Lower Decks, which we are thoroughly enjoying. I should have a review of Star Trek Adventures' latest RPG supplement, the Shackleton Expanse, which is their sandbox that CBS gave their blessing to, and that is a place in the beta quadrant where it also introduces new life path options for your Star Trek officers, and also includes rules for Klingon campaigns if you want to check that out. So we got a lot of cool stuff coming up before the end of the year. You can count on these books appearing in our annual holiday gift guide, which will be premiering on December 12th later on this year. And we are also still planning our Stargate campaign. I'm just literally starting college right now, so it's literally just finding time right now. So Stargate SG-1 Tactical Weapons Integration Group, or TWIG, will be premiering hopefully sometime in October. So folks, until next time, I have been Lieutenant Commander Birdman on this voyage, and I will catch you folks next time. So until next time here on ThisWeekInGeek.net, live long and prosper.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
Thanks for listening to this episode of This Week in Geek. Hungry for more? Check out our website at ThisWeekInGeek.net. You can subscribe to the podcast, browse our Twitter and Instagram, and leave your thoughts on today's topics. If you'd like to give us some feedback, send us an email at feedback@ThisWeekInGeek.net. Tune in next time, and remember,
lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.